Pam Bondi exposes Kaitlan Collins. You're done. 30 pieces of silver. That's all it took. In an age where digital footprints never fade, one clip surfaced and it detonated like political TNT. The face? Kaitlan Collins. The stage? Fox News, 2020. The words? Clear, sharp, and radioactive. George Soros is a foreign-born billionaire who wants to reshape America through immigration. His vision isn't rooted in citizenship, it's conquest by demographics. Boom. It wasn't fake, it wasn't doctored, it wasn't deep-faked by some AI bot from Belarus. It was real, unfiltered, raw. And it came from the same woman who now leads CNN's on-air crusade against right-wing conspiracy theories. In 37 seconds, the illusion shattered. And just like that, the watchdog became the hypocrite, the gatekeeper of truth, exposed as its most efficient executioner. The internet didn't just react, it convulsed. X, formerly Twitter, went into DEFCON 1 hashtags. Like hashtag CNN Judas and hashtag 30 shekels climbed the charts faster than a Biden gaffe. Meme pages lit up with side-by-side, stills of Collins then and now, righteous indignation replaced with robotic outrage. One clip from Benny Johnson's show showed him watching the video midstream. He paused, smirked, slapped the desk. Well, he grinned. 30 pieces of silver buys you a front row seat to CNN and a backstage pass to hell. The timing wasn't random. The drop came just as Collins was gearing up to attend a high-profile White House press briefing on transnational crime, a rare Oval Office event featuring President Trump and El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele. But this wasn't going to be business as usual. This was the stage, the trap. And whether Collins knew it or not, she was walking straight into it. Before the trap closed, though, the hypocrisy had to breathe. CNN scrambled. They didn't deny the video. Couldn't. Wouldn't. The footage was too crisp. The voice was unmistakable. Instead, they defaulted to corporate psychobabble. Reporters must be allowed to evolve. One press release even claimed her views had adjusted with new facts. New facts? Or new paychecks? Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General and current political wrecking ball, had stayed quiet until that tweet. Just one image. Collins, mid-sentence, eyes sharp, spitting fire at Soros in 2020. Captioned in Bondi's signature surgical precision, 30 shekels can buy airtime and apparently your spine. Within hours, it hit 1 million views, and that was just the beginning. Newsmax piled on. Their 8 OPMANCHOR opened with a monologue titled, "Kaitlan doesn't debate, she performs." The idea was simple. She didn't retract her old views, she just switched scripts. Same voice. New master. The Temple of Narrative had hired another priestess. Across the aisle, inside the White House, the energy shifted. The communications team noted an unusual uptick in calls, media watchdog groups demanding CNN be barred from future briefings. Dozens of GOP lawmakers chimed in. Congressman Byron Donalds tweeted, "The American people deserve answers, not acting lessons. It's not journalism if the questions are scripted and the outrage is rented." Behind closed doors, Trump flipped through printouts of tweets, headlines, and public reactions. There was no anger, no rush, just Diet Coke, fizzing in a glass, and a smirk that said everything. "She wants a front row seat?" he asked, without looking up. "Let's give her a stage." Just no teleprompter this time. And so it was done. CNN submitted a formal request to regain access to the briefing. It came via email, subject line, credential restoration request. It looked routine, bureaucratic, boring, but everyone in the West Wing knew exactly who it was for. The message didn't come from just any intern. It came from Kaitlan Collins. She wasn't just asking for a pass, she was demanding a spotlight. But this time, the rules had changed. The event she wanted in on was no normal presser. It was a curated media moment, hand-picked journalists, tightly controlled lists, immigration and security experts, judicial correspondents. CNN, absent. And not by accident. The White House response was subtle but sharp. Seats are reserved for outlets with sustained coverage of border policy and transnational crime. Translation? Your roundtables on gender pronouns and drag brunches don't cut it. Collins fired back instantly. On X, naturally. Journalism requires access. Don't let the right to ask a question become a privilege reserved for the agreeable. Of course, it went viral. Her followers called her brave. Media watchdogs cried censorship. And CNN? They devoted an entire panel to it, 5 anchors with the same expression of controlled outrage, like a support group for narrative casualties. Transparency, accountability. First Amendment erosion. It was like watching the DNC's group chat, but with commercial breaks. Trump was briefed the same afternoon. He didn't even glance away from his drink. She wants in, he said, dry, out of questions to shout from the back row. Pam Bondi didn't look up from her file. Let her in, she said flatly. She'll dig her own grave. All we have to do is hand her the shovel. Trump smirked. Hell, give her center stage. The Oval Office hasn't had this much fun since Acosta got tackled by a Secret Service intern. The room laughed. Stephen Miller raised an eyebrow. Should we prep rebuttals? Trump leaned back, fingers steepled. No rebuttals, just facts. And a live feed. And just like that, the trap wasn't just set. It was advertised. CNN got their seat. One chair, dead center. Kaitlan Collins confirmed. From that moment on, the countdown began, not to a debate, but to a reckoning. Not a press conference, but a public dissection. Because the thing about 30 pieces of silver, you can buy airtime with them. But not a way out. She got the seat. Dead center. Right in the camera's kill box. Framed perfectly by the flags, the seals, the optics, everything calculated for maximum clarity, maximum humiliation, and zero exit strategy. The White House didn't just give Kaitlan Collins a chance to speak. They handed her a spotlight so bright even denial would leave a shadow. But that's the thing about traps. The bait always feels like an invitation. From the moment the press advisory went out, CNN credentials restored for Friday's Oval Office briefing. The political ecosystem went into a silent, anticipatory hum. Staffers didn't say much. Reporters whispered about the seating chart like it was a classified schematic. Pam Bondi was seen flipping through thick manila folders, each marked with timestamps and legal citations. Stephen Miller adjusted his cufflinks like a man prepping for trial, not policy. And upstairs, Benny Johnson cleared his schedule because everyone knew this wasn't going to be a briefing. It was going to be Bloodsport. The topic on paper? Border security and transnational crime. The setup? A joint appearance between Donald J. Trump and President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, one of the few foreign leaders whose law enforcement record could make Trump look soft. The timing? Deliberate. The day after a California district judge issued a temporary injunction halting the deportation of a confirmed MS-13 member, citing procedural deficiencies. Translation: he didn't get a pillow mint with his removal order. CNN exploded. The ruling gave them oxygen, and Collins her weapon. She emerged on air with the ruling in hand, holding it like a courtroom gavel, declaring the deportation illegal, unethical, un-American. What she didn't say, of course, was that the man in question had already been found guilty by 2 separate immigration courts of active gang involvement, including human trafficking and targeted killings, or that MS-13 was classified as a foreign terrorist organization back in 2020, disqualifying him from legal protections under the Immigration and Nationality Act. But nuance never makes it to the chyron. So while Kaitlan Collins prepared to walk into the Oval Office like a prosecutor ready to grill a criminal defendant, the people she thought she'd corner were laying out the evidence, not to defend themselves, but to dismantle her. By the time Friday morning rolled around, the West Wing felt like a war room. Not a hint of panic, only purpose. The podium had been rearranged. Cameras double-checked. A separate angle added to capture press row reactions. Trump didn't rehearse. He didn't need to. Pam Bondi had already preloaded the room with more legal artillery than a DOJ subcommittee. And Bukele? He barely blinked, scrolling through his phone like a man about to drop a statement that would go viral in 4 continents. At precisely 2:53 p.m., the doors opened. Press entered. Chatter buzzed, subdued but electrified. Staffers handed out folders marked press briefing summary, each ending with a single bold line, Legal precedent is not theater, it's verdict. And then she walked in, Kaitlan Collins. Hair camera, ready. Heels sharp, posture like a closing argument. In her hand, a clean, double-stapled printout of the California court ruling. Her face said journalist. Her gait said gladiator. Her mission? To corner Trump, live, over a ruling she hadn't fully read, surrounded by facts she hadn't fully prepared for. Her seat? Center stage. The room adjusted as she entered, not out of courtesy, but calibration. CNN's lead anchor wasn't just being granted access. She was being given the floor. With every step forward, the noose of narrative tightening just a little more. Benny Johnson was watching it all unfold from a secure media room 2 floors above. His mic muted. His sarcasm wasn't, "Is she holding a court order?" he mused, or a suicide note. At 3:01 p.m., the air thickened. The double doors at the rear of the room opened. Trump entered. No wave. No flourish. Just the kind of quiet that follows inevitability. He walked with the unhurried confidence of a man carrying not notes, but a 9-0 Supreme Court decision and 75 million voters behind his eyes. He greeted President Buchel first. Firm handshake. Quiet respect. Cameras clicked in perfect rhythm. Then, without missing a beat, he turned toward the press, eyes sweeping the room, registering every face. And then came the cue. He looked straight at her. "Go ahead," Trump said, his voice dry as asphalt. "Let's hear the script." Silence. Tension snapped into attention. The trap had not only been set, it had been armed. Collins didn't hesitate. That was her edge. Her signature. The performance of certainty. "Mr. President," she began, her tone rehearsed courtroom steel. "Why did you choose to ignore a federal court ruling on the deportation of an El Salvadoran national despite clear judicial instruction?" Trump tilted his head slightly, amused, not rattled. The way a lion watches a house cat hiss. "I didn't ignore the court," he said smoothly. "I ignored the theater in your question. There's a difference." And just like that, the table flipped. Because the moment wasn't hers anymore. It never was. It never was. From the instant Trump fired back, calm, cutting, surgical, the dynamic shifted. Kaitlan Collins thought she'd arrived with a scalpel. Instead, she'd walked into an operating theater, and she was the patient. Her courtroom tone clashed with the Oval Office's cold clarity. She wasn't conducting an interrogation. She was triggering a prepared release of classified facts, legal precedent, and narrative annihilation. But the blow hadn't landed yet. That was reserved for Pam Bondi. She moved like a storm behind glass, controlled, precise, and lethal the moment you stepped too close. She stepped forward with a folder thick enough to carry the weight of truth, the kind of truth that doesn't trend on Twitter, but slams like a gavel on granite. Trump didn't look away from Collins as he spoke. "Pam," he said, still watching the anchor like a man reading ahead in a script he'd already memorized. "Let's make sure everyone's clear on what the law actually says before CNN writes another bedtime story for felons." Bondi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "The individual in question," she began, her tone flat but unyielding, "was found by not one, but 2 separate immigration courts to be an active, documented member of MS-13. That designation alone disqualifies him from any form of relief under the Immigration and Nationality Act, as amended by the 2020 classification of MS-13 as a foreign terrorist organization." She held up a page, stamped, signed, and marked with the seal of the Executive Office for Immigration Review. "This is not conjecture, not alleged, proven." The room didn't explode, it contracted. The murmurs stopped. Even CNN's camera angle stiffened, like it was trying not to flinch. Collins held her ground, but something in her grip shifted. The court ruling she'd brandished earlier, the one from the California judge, was now creased at the edge. Not from age. From pressure. Still, she pushed. "But the court," she said, jaw tight, voice tightening more, was clear that the deportation circumvented due process. Trump gave the kind of slow smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that says, "Now we're having fun." "The court," he said, was also clear that they didn't have jurisdiction to order the President of the United States to Uber criminals back into the country. There's law, and then there's performance. I respect one, I don't fund the other. Gasps. A pen dropped. Somewhere, a camera zoomed in on Collins' face, the moment her certainty collided with constitutional reality. Pam Bondi stepped back in. Due process happened. Twice. in full, with representation. What didn't happen is the political left accepting the outcome because they didn't like it. That's not injustice, that's ego. Then, from stage left, Stephen Miller stepped forward. If Bondi was the scalpel, Miller was the blowtorch. What you're watching here, he said, is not a legal debate. It's a coordinated PR offensive, one that attempts to elevate the subjective sentiment of a district judge over the authority of a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling. You want due process? You got it. Twice. What you don't get is a judicial due over every time a headline doesn't go your way. The press pool froze. NPR looked pale. Reuters scribbled. The AP reporter blinked twice. Collins stayed standing. She had to. It was no longer about the question. It was about survival. So, she said, pressing, you're saying due process is irrelevant if the individual is unpopular enough? Pam Bondi pivoted, a full 180 turn toward her, folder open, voice like iron. No. What we're saying is that due process was completed. By the book. What's irrelevant here is your framing. This isn't about popularity, it's about public safety and law. And then the moment cracked. Trump leaned slightly toward the mic, not with aggression, but with control. You want to talk about process? He said. Here's the process. Step 1, commit a felony. Step 2, get deported. Step 3, apply to CNN for sympathy coverage. Laughter flickered around the room, nervous, half stifled, but real. Even a few press row veterans bit their lips. Kaitlan Collins was still standing, but her voice had changed. It was less a question now, more a closing argument with no jury left to sway. Still, Mr. President, she said, one last time, why not just say it plainly? Why not just admit, I deported a criminal because I love this country? Trump's eyes locked on hers, not cruel, not mocking, just certain. Because I'm not auditioning for CNN, he said, and I don't do patriotic sound bites for people who wouldn't recognize patriotism if it bit them through their teleprompter. The room cracked. Not with volume, with tension. Pam Bondi didn't laugh. She didn't need to. The look she shot across the room was punctuation enough. Collins opened her mouth to respond, but Bondi cut in first. You want the law? She said, calm, unwavering. You want justice? We gave you both. What you're asking for now isn't truth, it's a rewrite. Behind her, Stephen Miller held up the printed 9-0 ruling. Thin paper, heavy weight. This, he said, wasn't a ruling. It was a political exorcism. And for the first time, Kaitlan Collins didn't answer because there was nothing left to say. And the room? It wasn't just watching. It was recording, live, uncut, forever. It should have ended there. A Supreme Court ruling, 2 confirmed immigration court decisions, a gang affiliation that no sane government would ignore. But the scene wasn't finished, because this wasn't just about law, this was about image, optics. And CNN had one more card to play, or so they thought. The real twist came not from Trump or Bondi, but from the man standing just off center the whole time. Calm, composed, scrolling through his phone like someone waiting for dessert while others argued over the main course. President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador. He hadn't said a word yet. But his silence wasn't passive. It was strategic. Because when he finally stepped forward, the room adjusted. Like instinct, like reflex. Suddenly, all eyes weren't on Trump or Bondi or even Collins, but on him. The foreign leader, whose streets had once been patrolled by machete-wielding ghosts, now standing as the architect of one of the most successful crackdowns on gang violence in modern history. He looked at Kaitlan Collins not with contempt, but curiosity, the way a surgeon might observe a patient's self-diagnosing with a horoscope app. Then he spoke. So, let me understand this, he said, slow, crisp English. You are asking if I plan to return an identified terrorist, someone who was found guilty by your courts and deported by your executive branch, back into your country? He let the question hang. No rephrasing, no softening. The silence had weight and teeth. Collins opened her mouth, maybe to clarify, maybe to retreat, but Bukele raised one hand, not to interrupt, to dismiss. We accepted that individual, he continued, because we respect sovereignty, because we understand that laws, when executed legally, should be honored. What we will not do is reverse that decision just to satisfy your headlines. His voice was calm, but the room flinched. We are cooperating. We've done our part. The question is not whether we will act like a responsible nation. It's whether you will. If Collins had a rebuttal, it died in her throat because the crowd didn't need facts anymore. They had context. Buchel wasn't just defending Trump's decision. He was dismantling the entire premise of her question and doing it from a foreign podium with none of the spin, none of the euphemisms, none of the media polish, just logic, brutal and unvarnished. We do not release terrorists into the streets, he added, which is why, unlike some countries, our murder rate is at a historic low. It was the knockout punch, delivered in a whisper. The reaction wasn't immediate. It never is in moments like these. There's a pause, a recalibration, like a system error in real time. Then it happened. A clap. Just one. Then another. Then a ripple. Not thunderous, but undeniable. Even CNN's own cameraman, battle-hardened and stoic, dipped his lens slightly, not by accident, but instinct. Kaitlan Collins didn't sit, but she didn't speak either. The printout she'd brought, the court ruling from California, now looked less like a legal document and more like a prop. Its corners were curled, the ink smudged at the edges from her tightening grip. And then Pam Bondi, silent until now, spoke again, this time not to Trump or the press, but directly to Collins. He had to go, she said. Simple. Final. No drama. Just facts with the finality of a locked vault. Still, Collins pressed. One last time, desperate for a foothold, even as the cliff gave way beneath her. But the El Salvadoran government signaled it was willing to receive him again. So if that's the case, why is this still a story? Stephen Miller didn't even blink. Because a district judge in California attempted to override the constitutional authority of the executive branch, not through law, but through political theater. That's not a story, Kaitlan. That's a crisis in a black robe. He held up the Supreme Court ruling again, thinner than a press release, heavier than an anvil. The circus, he said, was shut down unanimously. But Collins wasn't done, or couldn't afford to be. Her tone had shifted again, less prosecutorial, more performative. The question wasn't really a question anymore. It was a scripted monologue searching for punctuation. Then why not just say it plainly, Mr. President? She asked. Why not say, I kept a criminal out of America because I love this country? Trump didn't even flinch. Because I'm not trying to sell a t-shirt, he said. I don't reduce national security to slogans. That's your department. He turned slightly, facing the full press pool. I followed the law. Twice. With due process. Then I followed the Supreme Court. Unanimously. If that's political manipulation, then I suggest CNN reintroduce arithmetic to their newsroom. Chuckles. Sharp ones. Even from reporters who didn't want to laugh. Collins fired one last shot. So, due process only matters when it benefits your political position? Pam Bondi answered before Trump could. No. Due process matters always. That's why we did it. In public, with full legal representation. What doesn't matter is the refusal of media outlets to accept that sometimes the system works, even when it doesn't favor their editorial line. Stephen Miller stepped in again, a blade across bone. The media treats MS-13 like misunderstood misfits with machetes. But when a teenager gets butchered in Queens, they cut away to commercial. The only time they raise their voice is when we try to keep the killers out. Trump leaned in. If I say the sky is blue, he said, CNN asks if I've offended the clouds. But this isn't about feelings. This is about a terrorist. Confirmed by courts. Deported by law. Now, defended by a network that wouldn't let him within 10 blocks of their own studio. Boom. Another tremor. Small but real. Collins raised her voice again. Still, Mr. President, the court's language, Trump cut her off, not harshly, just definitively. Said what, exactly? That if El Salvador was willing, we had to send a plane? Fine. They were willing. We sent it. I didn't chase the guy down like a lost FedEx package. He boarded. We moved on. That line hit harder than anything before. Even the Associated Press reporter bit his lip to stifle a grin. And then Trump turned to the main camera, the one CNN was still broadcasting from. And that's why no one watches CNN anymore, he said, voice low but steady, because they hear, but they don't understand. No one moved, no one breathed, no rebuttal, no recovery. Because this time, the message wasn't for the room, it was for the country. And Kaitlan Collins? She was still standing, but no longer speaking. Because when a foreign leader, a president, a former attorney general, and a Supreme Court ruling all say the same thing, the silence of your network speaks louder than any question you could ever ask. She was still standing, but she wasn't in control anymore. Not of the narrative, not of the room, and certainly not of the camera that had just captured one of the most devastating public demolitions in recent political memory. Kaitlan Collins had walked into the Oval Office thinking she was armed, with a court ruling, with camera time, with outrage, but she hadn't brought facts. She brought a frame, a scene she thought she could direct. Instead, she found herself starring in a live-streamed correction. The court ruling, she once held like a sword, now hung limply in her hand, creased and folded from the tension of a battle she hadn't expected to lose. And certainly not this fast, this completely, this visibly. And the worst part? It wasn't over. Trump turned slightly, casting his gaze across the room, then settled it back on her. Anything else you'd like to ask about immigration, Kaitlan? He said, voice deceptively soft. Or are you switching beats to comedy next? The room didn't laugh, not out loud, but a few reporters glanced sideways, smirking behind raised notepads. Others sat still, expressionless, waiting for a cue that never came, because this wasn't performative anymore. This was punishment. Trump stepped forward again, not toward the mic, not toward Collins, but toward the American people, or rather, the millions watching from home, scrolling through clips, watching replays, sharing hashtags that wrote themselves. No script, no teleprompter, just clarity. When I keep criminals out of America, he said, voice low and deliberate, they call me ruthless. But when they let the same criminals stay, hide behind legal loopholes, and one of your neighbor's daughters ends up in a ditch because someone didn't want to seem xenophobic, they call that compassion. He let that word hang. Compassion, the redefinition of it, the weaponization of it, the media laundering of it. When I deport a foreign terrorist, he continued, I'm authoritarian. But if your sanctuary city loses another life because the courts didn't want to offend the ACLU, that's policy, that's journalism, that's your network. Kaitlan Collins tried again, not because she believed she could turn it around, but because she had to be seen trying. CNN was still live, the red light was still on. Failure on camera is forgivable. Surrender is not, Mr. President, she said, sharpening her tone one last time. You're manipulating the law for political gain. Trump turned his full body toward her now, not aggressive, not defensive, amused, like a professor watching a freshman explain constitutional law from a BuzzFeed article. Manipulating the law, he said, eyebrow raised. I followed it, twice, with full process. And when a district judge in California tried to write foreign policy from the bench, the Supreme Court handed down a unanimous ruling that said, and I'm paraphrasing here, sit down. A few reporters chuckled, a few swallowed their laughter, but the blow landed. Then, as if the performance needed one final closing act, Trump squared to the main camera, the live camera, the one CNN couldn't cut away from, not yet. He stared into the lens, not with venom, with finality. And that's why no one watches CNN anymore. Because they hear, but they don't understand. Silence. Except upstairs. In the secure media suite, Benny Johnson sat with his headset half off, mic still muted, his team silent around him, the monitors buzzing with static confidence. He leaned into his mic, flipped the toggle, and spoke low, like a eulogy with a grin. People keep asking me, did she cry? He paused. Just long enough. I don't know. Tears don't make sound. Then leaned back, mic off again, eyes still locked on the feed. Because the moment hadn't ended, not really. It had only changed settings. Downstairs, Kaitlan Collins gathered her notes. Not rushed. Not frantic. Just measured. Her movements were automatic, like someone trying to remember what normal looked like after losing a war they didn't even realize they were in. She slipped out the side entrance. No entourage, no camera crew, just the weight of a segment that didn't air as expected. Outside, a junior reporter from The Guardian, barely out of grad school, caught a glimpse of her, Alone, tense, jaw set. He fumbled with his phone, snapped a single photo, a blur of a court ruling, a folded press badge, and the kind of stare you only see when someone has to walk past their own mistake in high definition. Inside, no one mentioned her name again. There were no post-briefing panels, no spin rooms. CNN went dark mid-sentence, not with a dramatic cut, but with the quiet flick of a producer's finger, fades to black. Before the laughter could leak through, Trump had already moved on. He sat in the Roosevelt room, a fresh glass of Diet Coke bubbling on the table. No celebration, no remarks, just quiet satisfaction. Pam Bondi entered without fanfare, the same folder in her hand, now closed. "It's done," she said. Trump didn't look up. "How many views, you think?" he asked. Pam smiled, that sharp, clinical smile of someone who knows exactly how hard truth can hit when it's served without sugar. "Enough," she said. She didn't need to elaborate. The internet would write the rest. The hashtags were already trending. The clips were already cut. The reaction videos were uploading in real time. Outside the briefing room, the press began to pack up. No shouting, no spin, just quiet acceptance that something had shifted and not in their favor. And somewhere, back at CNN's control center, a producer stared at a blank script. The rundown had been wiped. The post-brief panel? Canceled. There was nothing left to say. Because you can't fact-check a silence that broke you, and you can't spin a camera that caught it all. Sometimes, the most powerful takedown isn't a mic drop. It's the click of a feed going dark.